Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about motivation. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, are there days when you aren't motivated enough to work and how do you deal with those days? Yes, there are days like that. Well, I would say that those sorts of days I usually try to I try the way that I think, just for this to make sense, is that I think in terms of energy in practically everything I do. And so what I mean by that is basically that I have tasks that take energy from me, takes a lot of cognitive resources, not necessarily just cognitive resources, but they take energy from me. And then I have things that give me energy or gives me some sense of fulfillment and so forth. And I try as much as possible to shuffle around my time and my days so that those things are a little bit in balance. I know myself well enough to know that the longer the day takes, or like I'm more of a morning person, so I'm pretty good at having high energy levels in the early days of the day. And then after lunch, it sort of just degrades from there. And the longer into the afternoon it goes, the worse it gets usually. And so, because I know those things, I usually try to take the things that are not that require a high level in order to effectively execute on a task and to do it really, really well. Then I usually try to put those tasks as early as possible when I really need my energy, and the stuff that isn't as cognitively require like that doesn't require as much like processing power, if you understand me, that I try to put later in the day so that I don't have to force myself to, because usually my work suffers, because as you can imagine, if I need a lot of a lot of energy to focus really, really intently and I'm not really feeling it, my work is going to suffer. And so when I have days where I really just feel like the whole day is like that, I do the same thing, because there's quite a lot of tasks that I have that I know that I can do that brings some measurement of value, and that doesn't really require me to have like a high level of motivation. In some cases, what I like to do is that I like to like just take a light day where I might write some unit tests. That's a very easy one because there's usually something that is missing somewhere, and then I might clean some things up, do some light refactoring or things like that. It's not possible, of course, if you have a sharp deadline and things like that, but usually when things like that is happening, it's easier for me to deal with those days, even if I'm not motivated, due to the fact that my survival instincts usually kick in and gives me the extra energy that I need. But otherwise, it's that simple usually. I might watch some tutorials or things like that. And in some cases, I might actually take a half day or like just take some time off because I'm not really at the peak of my game. And so usually what I like to say is that if you have a track record, like if you are on average pretty good at what you do, then I would say you shouldn't feel so guilty about having an off day and taking some time for yourself and so forth. And if you have a manager, like I've never had a manager who didn't understand that, because as I like to say, like the value is what matters, and only really silly and stupid people think in terms of time allocated. So like a really ignorant manager would say something along the lines of, "Oh, I expect you to put all your time onto your work every single day," and so forth and so forth. And so what I like to tell people in those situations is that, would you like me to just do the work that I'm paid to do? And nobody really understands me when I ask that question. And it's only when I start to make it clear to them what they're getting from me that they start understanding how these things usually really actually work. So usually the people who are really good at their job and really care about their work, you get a lot more from them than the people who are either incompetent or really just don't really care, or like they do the bare minimum, like I think it's called quiet quitting or something like that, that idea. And so a manager who doesn't understand that the happiness of the worker assuming now that the happiness isn't like that, it's in proportion. If you have a really, really motivated, talented software developer who is happy, you will get a lot more value from that person than a person that you force to work all the time, who's hating their job or whatever and so forth, if someone is slacking off and things like that, right? So what you have to balance is the needs of that individual, what they need to be happy and to be really productive and so forth, with what you're getting out, or like what it's costing you. And that balance, I mean, it's a little bit like a race car or a horse or anything like that, where if you push the thing to its absolute max all the time, it's going to burn out. So the trick is to get it to that perfect level where it's performing at peak levels without overexhausting it. And so when I have an off day, I know, and I feel absolutely no shame to admit that the times that I have not, because it's very rare that I have an off day like that, the value that I have produced during the time that I've worked up until that point overshadows any off day that I would have. So I feel no guilt whatsoever for taking a light day, or taking an extra long coffee break or anything like that, because I know that the salary, if you account for everything that my agreement with my employer is really about, they are getting a lot more from me than they would if I said, as I said, if I only do what's required of me, is that going to be good enough? And I've said that to friends and family before, who are the sort of people who are in much worse situations, where they are so nice that they will go to quite a lot of lengths, to some distance for their employer, even though their employer might not actually appreciate it whatsoever. They will stay late, or they will do extra things and so forth, just to make things work at their place of work, because they're good people, hard workers, and they really care about doing a good job. And they get exploited, or they don't get any appreciation for that. And then I tell them, remember that the high worker morale that you are showing here might be it might be irrelevant for your job. This is something you are doing out of the kindness of your heart because you are a good person. But the reality is that you might be doing quite a lot more than you need to for the company. The company is not appreciating your efforts. So why not just dial it back to, I'm now doing exactly as much as I need to not get fired, which is the idea of quiet quitting. If you do that, this is me, I'm not going to say that this is completely accurate, but I'm pretty sure that most industries, like most companies, will basically collapse if everybody started doing that. And only an ignorant employer wouldn't understand that that is the case. Because if you really dial it down to exactly only the thing that I have to do to not get fired, depending on occupation, depending on circumstance and so forth, that's not a lot of work for a lot of people. It would be the same thing as saying, in my opinion at the very least, that the only thing that should determine what you do and you don't do is if it is legal or not. If everything just came back to it's legal or not legal, we would have a pretty shitty world around us. Because I would go as far as to argue that most things in our society works because the average person is good and tries to do good things without having to be forced to do so. So what I want you to take away from this is that when I have an off day, usually I do write some unit tests, or I do, as I said, low energy tasks. I might do some code reviews or whatever have you. I might watch a YouTube video. In some cases, I might take an extra long coffee break or so forth and so forth. It doesn't really matter to me because, as I said, as long as I can in good faith say that this is just an off day for me, and on average I produce a lot of value for the company or so forth, I don't really feel bad about that. And I never had a manager who got in my face about that. It's, well, maybe once at some point, but it's, as I said, in those situations it has been due to that this is an ignorant idiot. And as I said, I've never had that conversation with a manager because why would I? What would I do? You can do this without telling anybody. I actually said that to my to a friend of mine the other day who had this exact problem in her company where she is a very hard worker. She does a lot of extra effort type of stuff for her company, and they show very, very little appreciation for it. And I said, you don't have to tell them anything. All you have to start doing is say no when everything is optional. Anything that is optional or anything that is handed to you, just take as much time as you feel that you need. Don't stress. Don't do anything whatsoever that in any way makes you feel uncomfortable or like feel like you're sacrificing something, and see if it is enough for them to fire you or to get a warning. If you're not getting a warning for your efforts, and that bar in some companies, guys, that's pretty damn low. Like if you're gonna slide under, like you're gonna get fired for negligence, like we're talking, the gap between how well she performs and that gap in a specific her specific company is enormous. Like she works so much harder than what you would technically have to do to keep the job. Then the company is going to suffer. Your manager is not going to get their results, and so forth and so forth. Like everything is just going to start dropping, and they have nobody but to blame but themselves, really. And that's the symbiotic relationship, I argue. If the workers are really trying their best, doing their absolute best, then the manager should appreciate. Ideally, the company should appreciate that and understand that people are not machines. There's going to be peaks and there are going to be slopes, and as long as the peaks are really, really good, having a slope here and there shouldn't be an issue for anybody, because it's the net benefit, I argue, that matters. Have a great day.